In the quiet town of Riverbend, life always moved slowly. The days were filled with the hum of cicadas and the distant sound of children playing outside. Most neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles, but things had taken a sour turn when Keith Anderson decided to stand up against the Riverbend Homeowners Association. Keith was a middle-aged man who loved to garden. His yard was filled with colorful flowers and tall, healthy vegetables. But when he recently sued the president of the HOA, Mrs. Martha Winslow, everything changed. Martha was known for being strict and often unfair, enforcing rules that seemed more about control than community. She had constantly complained about Keith's garden, claiming it was attracting pests. But Keith believed everyone should be free to express their creativity, especially in their own yards. One sunny morning, as Keith watered his tomatoes, he heard loud voices coming from the street. He turned to see a group of HOA members gathering outside his property, led by the fierce Mrs. Winslow. Curiosity piqued. Keith put down his hose and walked over to see what was happening. "Keith Anderson," Martha shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the peaceful morning. "You are in violation of our bylaws, and this is your final warning. We are going to take action." She pointed her finger in a way that made Keith feel uncomfortable. Before Keith could answer, the group suddenly turned and marched toward his house. He felt a mix of fear and anger. What are they doing? He wondered. It was then that he decided to call for backup. In a nearby community, for friends, all veterans from different branches of the military had found their new paths after serving. There was Danny, the impulsive Navy sailor; Sarah, the sharp-witted Air Force officer; Mike, the stoic Army sergeant; and Lucy, the caring Marine. They often met at the local diner to catch up and share stories. But today, Keith called them with a sense of urgency. "Guys, I need your help. The HOA is coming for me," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "I think they're planning something serious." "What do you mean by something serious?" Danny asked, concern growing. "They want to raid my property and take legal action against me for my garden. This is getting out of hand." Without hesitation, the group decided to rally for their friend. "We're on our way," Sarah said. "We'll be there in 10 minutes. As Keith waited, he watched the HOA members pacing in front of his property, whispering amongst themselves. He took a deep breath, knowing he was outnumbered but not outmatched. The veterans arrived just in time, pulling up in Danny's old truck. "Stay calm, Keith. We've got your back," Mike assured him. Keith felt a wave of relief wash over him. The situation escalated quickly as the HOA members noticed the group approaching. Martha's eyes widened as she recognized the veterans. "What are you doing here?" she shouted, her authority challenged. "We're here to support our friend," Lucy said firmly. "What exactly do you think you're going to do?" The HOA members looked uneasy. They weren't expecting this kind of support for Keith. Martha stiffened, trying to maintain her demeanor. "This is a private matter. You should leave," she demanded. "Actually, it's a community matter," Mike replied. "And as veterans, we know how to protect our own." The exchange was electric. Tension filled the air as the two groups faced off. Keith felt a mix of anxiety and gratitude. He knew he wasn't just defending his garden anymore. He was standing up for something bigger, his right to feel safe in his own home. As the standoff continued, Danny decided to break the tension with a grin. "Hey, Martha, did you know that our friend Keith here is a hero? His garden grows the best tomatoes in the whole neighborhood." The joke was lighthearted but drew a chuckle from some of the onlookers. Ignoring the humor, Martha grew angry. "Your little jokes won't save you from the consequences of breaking our rules," she snapped. Just then, Sarah, the only woman among the veterans, stepped forward. "What rules are you talking about? The ones that don't allow a person to have a garden? That seems a bit extreme, don't you think?" Martha huffed, still unwilling to budge. "This is not a discussion. This is a notice of violation." With the situation reaching a boiling point, Keith finally spoke up. "I have every right to grow my garden. It's my property, and everyone should respect that." His voice carried strength, carving a path through the tension. The veterans stood beside him, forming a united front. The HOA members glanced at each other, clearly unsure of how to respond. Suddenly, the sound of a police siren broke the heavy silence. Everyone turned to see a police car roll into the neighborhood. Officer Jenkins, known for being fair and kind, stepped out and walked over, instantly recognizing the situation's gravity. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between the two groups. "Officer, we are just following up on a violation," Martha started, her voice poised but trembling. "Violation of what exactly?" Jenkins questioned, noting the veteran's presence. "It looks like a disagreement over property rights to me." "That's right," Keith said, feeling emboldened. "I'm being attacked for having a little garden." Officer Jenkins crossed his arms, looking stern. "I think it's best we settle this peacefully. Everyone has the right to their own property. The HOA cannot enforce unreasonable rules." A collective sigh of relief washed over Keith and the veterans. They felt vindicated. Martha, realizing she was losing control, stepped back in defeat. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath as she turned away with her fellow HOA members. As they walked off, Keith felt an overwhelming sense of triumph. He had stood his ground, and with the help of his friends, he had defended his right to express himself. The veterans surrounded him, cheering softly, proud of their teamwork. "Looks like we make a pretty good team," Danny laughed. "Yes, we do," Keith smiled, tears brimming in his eyes. "Thank you all for standing by me." From that day forward, the bond between Keith and the veterans only grew stronger. The battle with the HOA was far from over, but they had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next. Riverbend would always be a quiet town, but now it was filled with friends and a sense of community like never before. Once upon a time in a quiet neighborhood called Maple Grove, life ran smoothly for most of the residents. The broad streets were lined with colorful houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and families enjoying their evening walks. But beneath the surface, things were not so peaceful. The Homeowners Association, known as HOA, had become a source of frustration for many. Meet Gary, a veteran who had just returned home after serving his country for many years. He had always dreamed of having his own peaceful place in Maple Grove. However, his dreams took a turn when he decided to challenge the HOA president, a man named Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson was known for his strict rules and severe fines. After Gary received a hefty fine for having his car parked in the driveway for a few hours, he finally decided enough was enough, and he sued Mr. Thompson. The lawsuit was a way for Gary to stand up not only for himself but for all the residents who were fed up with the HOA's demands. He wanted everyone to know they had a voice. His friends, Mark, Linda, and Jeff, who were also veterans, supported him. They often met at Gary's house, discussing strategies for the lawsuit. Mark had served as a military strategist, while Linda was a brilliant lawyer who helped Gary prepare his case. Jeff was always good for comic relief, easing the tension after long discussions. As they gathered one Saturday afternoon, tension filled the air. They were excited but nervous about the upcoming court date. "People need to see that we won't just roll over," Gary said, determination in his eyes. Linda nodded. "We have to be strong." Just then, their planning was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Gary opened the door to find Mr. Thompson himself standing there, his face filled with anger. "You should know your place, Gary," he shouted. "The HOA doesn't take kindly to people who challenge their authority." This unexpected visit shocked Gary and his friends. "You need to leave," Gary responded firmly. Mr. Thompson rolled his eyes and walked away, but the encounter made the atmosphere even more tense. Days flew by and the court date arrived. As Gary stood before the judge, nerves bubbled in his stomach. He spoke clearly, explaining how the HOA was causing problems for residents. "We just want to live peacefully," Gary said. The courtroom listened intently, and for the first time he felt hope. After the hearing, as the four veterans celebrated at Gary's home, they felt a wave of relief wash over them. "We did it," Jeff exclaimed, lifting his soda can high. But the joy did not last long. Just as they were relaxing, they heard sirens approaching. Confusion filled the air, and before they could figure out what was happening, officers, accompanied by the HOA, swarmed the property. Raiding the property? Gary yelled, stepping outside. He could hardly believe his eyes. Why are you here? Mr. Thompson, standing at the forefront of the group, smirked. We have some questions about your activities. Gary, feeling a chill run down his spine, remembered he had friends with him who could back him up. We're not afraid, he shouted. The officers and HOA members were taken aback when they saw not just Gary, but also Mark, Linda, and Jeff stepping out behind him. They were all trained veterans, each with a strong presence. We've done our part for our country, Mark said confidently. We are not intimidated. The unexpected sight of 4 armed veterans changed the tension in the air. Officers were unsure how to proceed. Listen, one of the officers said, looking uncomfortable. We are here because the complaints reported a disturbance. We didn't know you had friends who are, well, veterans. Linda stepped forward. We have a right to defend ourselves. What's this really about? After a long pause, one of the younger officers sighed. These types of raids are usually not aggressive. We heard you might be engaging in illegal activities. Mr. Thompson chimed in. You have violated several HOA rules, and we simply wanted to remind you. Now it was Gary's turn to be angry. You are using this as an excuse because you don't like our lawsuit, he replied, voice firm. The veterans formed a wall of support around Gary, their presence a strong reminder that they were not alone. The officers, realizing the situation was escalating into chaos, began to retreat slightly, not wanting to confront trained soldiers. Suddenly, Linda spoke up. This is harassment. You have no grounds to raid us. Mr. Thompson, sensing defeat, stepped back. I just want to maintain order in Maple Grove. You won't get away with this. No, you won't, Gary shot back. We are fighting for our rights. Just then, the other officers exchanged glances and decided it was best to back off. We'll leave for now, but we'll be back, one officer said as they turned to leave. Mr. Thompson, anger burning in his eyes, muttered under his breath, You'll regret this. As the group dispersed, the veterans stood together, breathing heavily yet relieved. This isn't over, Gary said, but there was a sense of pride among them. They had taken a stand, and for the first time they felt their voices mattered. In the coming weeks, Gary and his friends worked hard to spread the word about the HOA's oppressive measures. They organized meetings with other residents, showed them they were not powerless, and their movements started gaining momentum. The news about the raid circulated, and soon many in the community joined their cause. As winter approached Maple Grove, what began as a battle between one veteran and an aggressive HOA turned into a community uprising. Gary, Mark, Linda, and Jeff stood together, no longer just 4 veterans, but the voice of the people of Maple Grove. They had each other's backs, and together, they prepared to continue the fight, determined to reclaim their neighborhood and bring back peace for all. What had started as fear and intimidation turned into hope and determination. The veterans reached out, taught others about their rights, and soon the neighborhood was buzzing with energy. Gary smiled as he looked at his friends. Together, they were strong. Together, they would make a difference. And they wouldn't stop until Maple Grove was as peaceful as it was meant to be. Ethan, a strong, brave, and determined veteran, deeply committed to justice. Maria, Ethan's supportive and intelligent wife, with a background in law. David, a resourceful and level-headed veteran, skilled in security and tactics. Sarah, a compassionate and observant veteran, trained in medical support and reconnaissance. Mr. Harrison, the arrogant and corrupt president of the HOA, used to getting his way. Here is your story. The quiet of a Tuesday afternoon was shattered by the roar of engines. Ethan, a veteran with a steely gaze and a heart full of resolve, stood on his porch, his jaw tight. He watched as a convoy of black SUVs screeched to a halt in front of his house. This was it. The Homeowners Association, led by the notoriously vindictive Mr. Harrison, was making their move. Ethan had sued Harrison for corruption and misuse of HOA funds. It was a David versus Goliath battle, but Ethan was not one to back down from a fight, especially when justice was at stake. He knew Harrison would retaliate, but he never imagined the audacity of what was about to unfold. HOA inspection. Open up! A voice boomed from a megaphone. Ethan didn't flinch. He had anticipated this. What Harrison didn't know was that Ethan wasn't alone. Inside the house, David and Sarah, fellow veterans and trusted friends, were ready. They had been expecting this, preparing for a battle they hoped to avoid. Maria, Ethan's wife, a sharp and intelligent woman with a background in law, stood beside him. They can't do this, Ethan. They have no legal right. They don't care about the law, Maria, Ethan replied, his voice calm but firm. Harrison thinks he's above it. The front door splintered as a team of men, clad in what looked like paramilitary gear, forced their way in. They were clearly hired muscle, not official inspectors. Secure the premises, their leader yelled. That was their mistake. David, a master of security and tactics, moved like a ghost. He had already disabled the security cameras and reinforced the entry points. As the intruders spread through the house, they found themselves in a maze of obstacles. What the hell? One of them muttered, tripping over a strategically placed obstacle. Sarah, a trained medic and reconnaissance expert, was the eyes and ears of the operation. She monitored their movements, relaying information to Ethan and David. 2 in the living room, 1 in the kitchen, 3 heading upstairs, she whispered into her headset. Ethan moved with precision. He confronted the 2 men in the living room, his combat experience evident in every step. He didn't want to hurt them, but he wouldn't hesitate to defend his home. You need to leave, Ethan said, his voice resonating with authority. You're trespassing. The men sneered. We have orders. We're here to inspect the property. You're here to intimidate, Maria interjected, her voice sharp and unwavering. And you're failing miserably. The men lunged, but Ethan was faster. He disarmed them with swift, efficient movements, pinning them to the ground. Upstairs, David was dealing with the other intruders. He used a combination of stealth and tactical maneuvers to neutralize them, avoiding serious injury. Meanwhile, Sarah had slipped outside, gathering intelligence. She watched as Mr. Harrison arrived, a smug look on his face. He seemed confident, even gleeful. See? I told you he was violating HOA regulations, Harrison said to a woman beside him, who looked like a local journalist. This is a clear case of property mismanagement. Sarah knew this was a setup. Harrison had brought the media to witness Ethan's violations, hoping to publicly humiliate him and ruin his reputation. She quickly contacted Maria, relaying the information. Maria's eyes flashed with anger. He's using this for publicity. We need to turn the tables. As Harrison approached the house, expecting to see chaos and disarray, the front door opened. Ethan stood there, calm and collected, with the captured intruders behind him. Mr. Harrison, Ethan said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I wasn't expecting you. What a pleasant surprise. Harrison's face paled. He hadn't expected Ethan to be so composed, so in control. What is the meaning of this? Harrison stammered. This, Ethan said, gesturing to the captured men, is evidence of your illegal activities. These men were hired to trespass and intimidate. I believe that's a criminal offense. The journalist's eyes widened. She started recording, her camera focused on Harrison's face. These are just HOA inspectors, Harrison insisted, his voice strained. They're here to ensure compliance. Inspectors don't usually break down doors and assault homeowners, Maria said, stepping forward. I happen to be a lawyer, and I assure you, this is far from legal. David and Sarah emerged from the house, flanking Ethan. The sight of the 3 veterans, standing tall and resolute, was enough to intimidate even the most hardened criminals. Mr. Harrison, David said, his voice low and menacing, I suggest you leave. Now. Harrison realized he had made a grave mistake. He had underestimated Ethan and his friends. He had walked into a trap and now he was exposed. This isn't over, Harrison hissed, his face red with anger. Yes, it is, Ethan replied, his gaze unwavering. "It's over for you." Harrison turned and fled, the journalist hot on his heels, peppering him with questions. The black SUVs screeched away, leaving Ethan and his friends standing victorious. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence. They had witnessed a battle, a clash between justice and corruption, and for the first time they saw hope. In the days that followed, the story of the HOA raid spread like wildfire. The journalist's report exposed Harrison's corruption and abuse of power. The community rallied behind Ethan, demanding his resignation. Facing mounting pressure and the threat of legal action, Harrison was forced to step down. The HOA was reformed, its funds audited, and its regulations rewritten. Ethan, David, and Sarah became local heroes. They had stood up to tyranny and won. They had shown that even the most powerful forces could be defeated with courage, determination, and a little help from friends. But for Ethan, the victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a testament to the values he had fought for as a soldier: justice, integrity, and the unwavering defense of freedom. John, protagonist; Robert, HOA president; Mike, veteran 1; David, veteran 2; Tom, veteran 3. John, a man of quiet demeanor but firm principles, had always believed in standing up for what was right. He lived in the Harmony Glade community, a place that was once as peaceful as its name suggested. However, things had changed drastically since Robert, a man with an insatiable hunger for power, became the HOA president. Robert's reign was marked by arbitrary rules, selective enforcement, and a general disregard for the residents' concerns. John, along with several other homeowners, had tried to reason with him, but Robert was unyielding, drunk on the authority he wielded. The final straw came when Robert imposed a hefty fine on John for a minor landscaping infraction that John believed was entirely fabricated. John, tired of Robert's tyranny, decided to take legal action. He filed a lawsuit against Robert, alleging abuse of power and selective enforcement of HOA rules. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Harmony Glade. Robert, accustomed to having his way, was furious. He saw John's lawsuit as a direct challenge to his authority and vowed to retaliate. Meanwhile, John knew he had made a powerful enemy. He wasn't afraid, but he was cautious. He had served his country with honor and knew how to handle himself in a difficult situation. He also had a few trusted friends who had his back. Mike, David, and Tom were fellow veterans and close friends of John. They had all served together and shared a bond forged in the crucible of war. They were men of unwavering loyalty and courage, and when John told them about his situation with Robert and the HOA, they immediately offered their support. "Don't worry, John," Mike had said. "We've got your back. We won't let that bully push you around." With the support of his friends, John felt more confident. He continued to gather evidence for his lawsuit, determined to expose Robert's misdeeds. As the lawsuit progressed, the tension in Harmony Glade escalated. Robert became increasingly erratic, lashing out at anyone who dared to question him. He started spreading rumors about John, trying to turn the community against him. One evening, John received a disturbing phone call from a neighbor. "John, I overheard Robert talking to some guys," the neighbor whispered. "He said he's planning to teach you a lesson. I don't know what he meant, but it didn't sound good." John thanked his neighbor and immediately called Mike, David, and Tom. They met at John's house to discuss the situation. "It sounds like Robert is planning something," John said. "We need to be prepared." "What do you think he'll do?" David asked. "I don't know," John replied. "But we can't take any chances." They decided to take turns watching John's house, ensuring that he was never alone. They also made sure to keep their firearms close at hand, just in case. A few nights later, their vigilance was put to the test. John was asleep in his bedroom when he heard a loud crash outside. He jumped out of bed and grabbed his rifle. Mike, who was on watch, burst into the room. "They're here," Mike shouted. "There are at least a dozen of them." John, Mike, David, and Tom quickly took up defensive positions inside the house. They knew they were outnumbered, but they were determined to protect John and his property. Through the windows, they saw a group of men, led by Robert, approaching the house. Some of them were carrying baseball bats and crowbars. It was clear they were there to cause trouble. Robert yelled, "John, come out here and face us like a man." John didn't respond. He knew that engaging with Robert and his thugs would only escalate the situation. He had to remain calm and think clearly. Robert, growing impatient, ordered his men to break down the door. The men rushed forward, swinging their bats and crowbars. But as they reached the porch, the front door suddenly swung open, and John, Mike, David, and Tom stepped out, weapons raised. The sight of 4 armed veterans, standing their ground, stopped Robert and his men in their tracks. They had expected an easy fight, but they were now facing a formidable force. "Get off my property," John commanded, his voice firm and unwavering. "I won't ask you again." Robert, his face flushed with anger, hesitated. He had underestimated John and his friends. He didn't expect them to be armed and ready for a fight. "We're just here to talk," Robert stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're trespassing and threatening me," John retorted. "That's not talking. Now, get out of here before things get worse." Robert knew he was outmatched. He couldn't risk a confrontation with 4 armed veterans. He reluctantly ordered his men to retreat. As Robert and his men retreated, John, Mike, David, and Tom stood their ground, watching them until they were gone. The next day, John contacted the police and reported the incident. Robert and several of his men were arrested and charged with trespassing, threats, and other offenses. The lawsuit against Robert continued, and with the evidence of his recent actions, John was confident that he would win. The raid on John's property was a turning point in the Harmony Glade community. It exposed Robert's true nature and galvanized the residents to take action. They organized a recall election and voted Robert out of office. Harmony Glade slowly began to heal. The community came together, working to restore the peace and harmony that had once defined it. John, with the support of his friends, continued to stand up for what was right. He became a voice for the voiceless, fighting against injustice and corruption. He learned that even in the face of adversity, one person can make a difference. And sometimes all it takes is a few good friends and a willingness to stand your ground to protect what you believe in. The events that transpired at Harmony Glade served as a reminder that power should be used responsibly and that those who abuse it will eventually be held accountable. And for John, Mike, David, and Tom, it reaffirmed the bond of friendship and the courage to stand up for what is right, no matter the odds.